Welcome, and thanks for joining us today. You're listening to the Women's Broadcast Television Network, and I'm your host, Shea Vaughn. WBTVN is the all-women's internet television station where content is created by women and for women. And you're here today listening to the Expert Spotlight Show. And our guest today is someone really interesting. I think you're really going to love this interview. So let me tell you just a little bit about him. Robert Gleason has dedicated nearly 30 years to researching the threat of nuclear terrorism and the possibility of nuclear destruction. He was recently featured in the History Channel special Prophets of Doom. He has also had an extremely long and exceptionally successful career as an acquisitions editor in New York City. Welcome him to the show for me, please. Robert, my goodness, you've done so many things. We were talking just before we got on. You have not lived a traditional life.
Well, when I was a kid, I was obsessed with the Odyssey by Homer. And, Odysseus wanders the seas, sees everything in the ancient world. And kind of as a book editor, you kind of do the same thing without leaving your office, that everybody eventually writes a book. And so you get to work with everybody I've worked with vice presidents, I've worked with 2 defense secretaries, a couple of 4-star generals, CIA people, NSA people. I've worked with Hell's Angels, I've worked with hitmen, I've worked with pimps and prostitutes. I mean, everybody eventually writes a book, and after 47 years in the book business, I've gotten to know individuals from practically every walk of life imaginable.
That is amazing. So I do have to ask you this question. Have you written a book?
Yeah, I've written 18 books, actually.
I knew that you had several of them. And so, but before we get started on all of that, tell me a little bit about your background growing up as a young boy, and how did you get to where you are today?
Well, I grew up in a steel town on the edge of Gary, Indiana, called Michigan City, Indiana. Getting through school, I worked 7 years on and off in the Gary steel mills. It was a very rough town. It was a prison town. I grew up next door to the maximum security prison. I had one neighbor who was the prison doctor, psychiatrist. Another was the prison torturer. Yes, they had a prison torturer. And when I was young, I used to play tennis tournaments on the big yard, and I'd memorize the serial numbers of the inmates. And afterwards, I'd write them out for Doc Weeks. And he would pull their file jackets for me. And these guys that I would play tennis with and walk the big yard with that were so kind and soft-spoken and ingratiated. One of them was an axe murderer, and he was actually the best player in the entire prison. But they had all done terrible things. These were the nicest, sweetest human beings you would ever meet. They were violent psychopaths. And later, Jacob Bernowski once wrote that violence wears the face of fallen angels. He calls violence the Sphinx by the fireside. And I've been in New York City, named today after me for the work I've done for prison literacy. I've been in over 60 prisons. Sister Megan Rice, who is an 85-year-old nun and an anti-nuclear activist, I actually got her out of prison. And but I've seen the same thing, not with Sister Megan Rice, obviously, but so many of the really violent inmates. They have soft eyes, soft voices. That they look you in the eye. They're interested in your life, and then you find out what they've done. I did a book with a hitman, and he was one of the kindest, most sensitive people you'd ever meet. And then you look at what he did, and it was horrendous.
Wow, 2 personalities and all kinds of different things.
One of the reasons we write books, to try to figure out people like that.
Yeah.
We're still puzzling over Adam and Eve and why they ate the apple.
Temptation.
Well, what the serpent tells Adam and Eve, how he argues them into it. He says, if you eat the fruit of the tree thereof, then ye shall be as gods. If you can steal somebody's prized possessions, you become a god.
Wow. I guess that's a lot of temptation and hard to kind of ignore, right?
That's why in Catholic theology, greed is the worst of the 7 deadly sins. Pride is ahead of it, but that's only because it's the motivating force behind the other sins.
So greed, that's interesting to me, greed, because I think unfortunately, we see too much of that in today's world.
Yeah, it's considered to be a virtue by a lot of people. That shows us how far we've come from Christ's time.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, greed is not sharing at all, not giving a hand up, not helping your neighbor, not, writing beautiful books about, giving back.
Yeah.
All of those things. Wow.
Yeah.
Kind of wipes that out.
Yeah.
We don't want that to happen.
No.
So but what actually got you into after school and whatever, what drove you to the area that you're in now? I know that you worked for Simon and Schuster,
right,
for a while.
Yeah. And well, I did a book with Larry Niven and Jerry Purnell called Lucifer's Hammer. And it was about an asteroid. It was about a big comet that rounds the sun. It contains in it a couple of mountains of nickel, huge mountains, and it's held together by ice. When it swings around the sun, the ice melts, and the Pacific and the Atlantic Ocean each get hit by a gigantic mountain of nickel. And these two mountains crack the Earth's core. The molten magma from the molten iron from the Earth's core comes up into the ocean. It vaporizes zillions of tons of salt water, which come down in the temperate regions of saltwater rain, and it destroys the topsoil pretty much forever. It comes down in the polar regions as snow and ice, inaugurating a new ice age. Niven and Purnell pretty much destroyed the whole planet, and it was the most overpowering novel I ever read, and it was a huge bestseller. It still sells, and I was haunted by it, and I still am. And I wanted to write an apocalyptic novel myself. And I looked at it seemed to me there had never been a really good one done where they dramatized the nuclear apocalypse. I was interested in it, but you couldn't really, the scenarios didn't work. Back in the days of the Cold War, there was no logical reason for the United States and Russia to destroy each other. There was a mutual suicide pact. But after the Soviet Union broke up, suddenly there was a lot of bomb-grade, highly enriched uranium and plutonium on the black market. It was available, and terrorists could put this together. They could foment nuclear strikes. They could even create the illusion that the great powers were nuking each other. It was really dangerous stuff. I went to study it and the subject, and there is almost nothing out there on nuclear terrorism. In fact, I wrote a nonfiction book on it just simply because there wasn't anything out there.
Wow.
And then I really got into the subject, and I had access to a lot of real experts, and it was scary. It's much easier to do than to commit a nuclear terrorist attack is much easier to do than people realize. And most people that really study it are kind of astonished that it hasn't happened already.
Really?
Yeah.
I mean, but look at how much turmoil
every
single day that we hear about this happening that you're talking about. And
if you get a chunk of bomb-grade, highly enriched uranium, the size of a grapefruit, and you put one chunk on the ground, you put another chunk 6 feet above it, and you drop the one onto the other. If you hit it square, you could get between half and 2/3 of the Hiroshima yield. You put them in a piece of old Civil War cannon barrel, you blast one into the other, you might approximate the Hiroshima yield. As Luis Alvarez, who created the triggering mechanism for the Hiroshima bomb, said, once you're in possession of the bomb-grade highly enriched uranium, a high school kid could build the Hiroshima bomb. And that stuff is not well guarded. My old friend Sister Megan Rice proved that. She broke into our Y-12 nuclear facility at Oak Ridge, which was outside of Knoxville. She cut through the fence at night with bolt cutters, went in, she spray painted peace slogans on the big building that houses, it's the biggest repository of bomb-grade highly enriched uranium in the world. It has over 100,000 tons. She spray painted peace slogans and sat down on the curb and sang hymns until finally somebody picked her up. She'd been there several hours. It's not that hard to get this stuff, and it is kind of a mystery why there haven't been nuclear terrorist attacks. In Pakistan, we know that there's a terrorist. The TTP has broken into a half a dozen nuclear facilities, blown them up. there have been nuclear terrorist attacks in Pakistan.
And how come we haven't even heard about that, though?
It gets into the newspapers, but it's not, I don't know, it's not dramatic. In the United States, people, they really, what the networks really want to do is attack politicians. They don't, it's very, very, the news here is very, very gossipy. They really don't go that much after content.
Uh-huh. And so not going after content, I see where everybody wants to find out, the truth on certain things that have been expressed. And yet, even when certain things come out about that, you're not sure whether that's really the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Oh yeah, and everything, as we were talking about greed before, everything's very heavily influenced by money. Everybody hates nuclear power. In my novel, And Into the Fire, I melt down a couple of I have terrorists melt down a couple of nuclear power plants in great detail. In fact, one of the reviews talked about how I really described exactly how terrorists would melt down nuclear power plants. And I'm not teaching them anything. We've had terrorists that have worked in U.S. nuclear power plants. Sharif Mohabli worked in 7 or 8 of them, and it was later arrested in Yemen for terrorism and was imprisoned, and he killed a couple of guards trying to break out of prison. He's a very tough guy. There have been a number of terrorists who worked in European nuclear power plants. The Indian Point outside of Manhattan was an ancillary target for the terrorists on 9/11. That in case they couldn't find the World Trade Centers or whatever, they were going to crash it into the airliner into Indian Point, the Indian Point nuclear power plant. So we know that nuclear power plants are on their list. They are targeting them. Yeah. They've already had people working there, scouting them out. So it's just, and it's relatively, as I describe in Into the Fire, it's relatively easy to do. And I've had, by the way, defense contractors, or defense secretaries, 4-star generals have really talked about it's the most detailed scenario they've ever seen for nuclear attacks.
Wow. I mean, that's scary. But what actually, I mean, you've dedicated 30 years of your life in research, where this is concerned. What happened, or what took place in your life that you got curious about this and actually spent 30 years doing the research?
It was when I was researching. I've done a huge apocalyptic novel called End of Days. It took me a long time. I did a lot of research on it, and there was almost no information on the subject. It took me about 10 years to compile the information to write the novel. Then when I wrote my nonfiction book, The Nuclear Terrorist, it took like forever to get. Nobody is studying it. I work with a lot of very highly placed Pentagon people. The Pentagon doesn't study nuclear terrorism. CIA doesn't study it. The NSA doesn't study it. It's one of the reasons is that there's what Ralph Peters called a no man land between nuclear power and the nuclear bomb. The way countries like Pakistan and Iran get their nuclear weapons program is that they use nuclear power as a Trojan horse to get us to supply them with the technology. Well, once you have a nuclear power plant, you're really about 3 months away from having a nuclear bomb. It's real easy using low-tech equipment to build a nuclear bomb fuel reprocessor. Everybody knows how to do that. You can do that with the equipment from an old winery or an old dairy. Take you about 6 months, and then it take you a month to reprocess enough nuclear bomb fuel to power the Nagasaki bomb. And there's just, so we end up, the United States, we sold Iran their first reactors. We sold Pakistan their first reactors. We're the largest proliferator of dual-use nuclear technology in the world. And we've done it all for money. The irony is that one day when we do get nuked, we will have paid those people to nuke us. And so it was really a kind of an anger that built up in me. The more and more I got into it.
Gotcha.
At one point, we tried to build nuclear power plants for North Korea. It was about 17 years ago. It was Donald Rumsfeld was a board director of a Swiss nuclear contractor, and they were trying to sell nuclear reactors to North Korea.
Wow. How come, I wonder why this isn't newsworthy?
It was covered by the Guardian. It was covered in Europe. I don't. The American news media is isn't. I don't know. I don't know what drives them. I expect it's money.
Money.
Yeah. Yeah, they're interested in ratings. They're interested in flashy stories. I don't know what the attention span of their viewers is like. Typically, the New York Times did a study of the last election, and the American public knew shockingly little about either Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump. Knew almost nothing when they went in the booth and pulled the lever. They did a 3-month study on it. It was really an in-depth, study of what people actually know about their political candidates. It's next to nothing.
Well, we don't know what goes on behind closed doors.
Sure.
And I think that's a whole different thing.
Sure.
I mean, there's many, television programs and whatever that talk about this, and that's true in life. They don't really get to know that person unless you live next door to them or you become friends or, have conversations over and above what the media tells us or they tell us.
Yeah.
That's the only thing that we really have to go on.
James in the New Testament says that faith without deeds is dead. And you can surmise quite a bit about a person's character if you look at their deeds, particularly if you follow their money. An old-time investment banker once told me, he said, you never get to know anybody until you handle their money. And, you look at how they've earned a living, what they've done for a living, what have they done for other people. The actions do speak louder than words. And you can intuit quite a bit about people from how just examining how they live their life. Well, take a look at their tax return. That will tell you a hell of a lot.
Yeah. I just think that so many times people hide behind the goodness of nonprofit organizations.
Sure, absolutely.
And that because I do believe that they are out there for a purpose, for finding different cures in whatever it happened to be, whether it's cancer or whatever disease. The thing of it is that what are they getting out of other than what are they getting out of the supporting these things other than trying to fool, in my opinion, the general public as to who they are and what they really are all about. And this isn't taking any sides on the political side of it. I'm sure it happens on no matter what. But I think those kinds of things, when here's a nonprofit organization, it's really trying to do some good.
Yeah.
And you've got people attaching themselves to it or even funding it and whatever, so that they can get noted for not the goodness that they do.
Yeah. Oh, well, you see that with Hollywood stars all the time. They're always attaching themselves to some charity, PETA.
Not all of them. I'm going to jump in there and say that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. But you see a lot of them do that.
Yeah. So you've written 18 books.
Yeah.
And what was your most recent book that you wrote?
It's the one that's just come out now, And Into the Fire. One of the things I find that people tend to be fascinated about is that most people don't understand the book of Revelation. One of the reasons is, which really does prophesy a lot of the stuff that we're all worried about. One of the reasons is the first chapter of Revelation is supposed to be chapter 13. That an angel in chapter 13, an angel comes down, says to humanity, you've got two choices. Greed, you're being destroyed by greed. You're wearing the 666, the mark of the Antichrist. In order to make money in this world, after and during the time of Revelation, you have to do transactions with the Antichrist, and to make money, to get rich, you have to deal with the devil. And so the angel says, you're going to give up your greed. You're going to stop doing business with the Antichrist. You're going to basically stop getting rich. Or if you don't, you're going to go. You're going to spend all of eternity in hellfire and brimstone. And 1/3 of humanity says money and hellfire and brimstone. Money, hellfire and brimstone. I think I'll take the money. And so then the four horsemen come down. Then we begin with chapter 1. The four horsemen come down. So Revelation's very little understood. They don't like, just as in Adam and Eve are punished for covetousness, which is a kind of greed. They coveted God's prized apples. You know, at the end of the Lord's Prayer, Christ says, he does not say, forgive us our trespasses. That's an inaccurate translation. The real translation is, forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. So if you foreclose on your neighbor's house, if you repossess his car, if you jack up his interest rates, you're saying, God, do the same thing to me. And as we were talking before, a lot of the problems with nuclear terrorism, we are out there ourselves financing these people, and we're doing it to make money. And it really is, it's straight out of Revelation. The people have been predicting this for thousands of years.
Wow. Yeah. You know, greed is never going to serve us.
No.
Never going to serve our nation,
no.
or our families, or any of those things. And I do, you know, I'm very positive and have great hope that, you know, some of the people that are kind of lost, and I say that because I think they are lost,
yeah,
will wake up. And I mean, you know, your destiny, we don't even think about our destiny when we're younger.
Yeah.
It's kind of like every day we're just, you know, living life.
Yeah.
But every single choice that we make, every day of our life, is what our destiny will be.
Yeah.
And
the 1/3 of the world's GDP, is $75 trillion. 1/3 of it, $26 trillion, is in offshore black hole accounts. It's black money that people have stolen and hidden away. That in Russia, it's over 100% of Russia's GDP is an offshore black hole, black money accounts. That global derivative debt. Derivative debt is pure, intrinsic, uncollateralized debt. It's based on nothing. Total global derivative debt is now over $1.5 quadrillion. It's hundreds, 1,000 times more than the world's GDP. And that is pure intrinsic greed.
right.
The 50% of all nonprofit in this country today is sucked up by Wall Street. That's bigger than the IRS.
Right.
The IRS doesn't take 50% of corporate profit. I mean, it's the world really is hitting a tipping point as far as greed comes, and I think a symptom of that is the availability for terrorists of nuclear bomb fuel. I think it's biblical.
Opens the door
Yeah.
for all of that to happen, because
It's a tragedy of biblical.
somebody's going to sell it to get the money. Exactly. Yeah. I get that. So where's the hope? What is, you know, because I definitely believe that there is. I think that there are great people out there that really care about America, care about people. I just think we need to unite better together, irregardless of whatever political side is or isn't, or whatever. And there's just comes a time in your life where you want to set that down, because, you know, we should be thinking about our grandchildren and their children and the legacies that all of this is that's leaving. And it just doesn't need to be what we have right now that we're doing.
Absolutely. And there have been times in American history that Theodore Roosevelt reformed financial abuses in this country. FDR did the same thing. Toynbee studied the decline and fall of rise and fall of 22 world civilizations, and he said in the end that the civilizations that it always came down to ethical choices, and the civilizations that collapsed made the wrong ethical choices. And he said that and Toynbee believed, like you said, there are always choices. And we still, thank God, have a democracy. We still can vote. We can still make choices. We have there's more factual information available to American citizens today, thanks to the internet, and all the book publishing companies, the internet magazines and newspapers. There's more free information available than any time in our history. And if people will just educate themselves to the issues, if they if they take an active interest, we can do anything.
Right.
We can really turn this country into the city of God.
I think we can, and I think that there are great hearts out there that
Absolutely,
that definitely share that. I want to go back though a little bit, because the prison part of this, you actually ended up working with going into the prisons and working with individuals.
Yeah, I was always haunted. While I was in college, I worked in a local steel mill for a time, and they hired ex-convicts, and also signed the parole papers for psychotics. And so I worked to a large extent. Over half the steel mill was ex-cons. It was a small mini mill. Over half of it was ex-cons. I got to know a lot of them. And by kind of coincidence, when I started out in book publishing, I worked with a couple of really great ex-convict writers, Malcolm Brawley and Nathan Hurd, and they encouraged me to go into prisons and talk to inmates about how to get free books from publishers, read what books, talk to them about reading books, forming book clubs, talk to them about how to write books, get published. And over the years, I published a couple of dozen inmates, and I got to I've gone into a lot of prisons. I don't travel as much as I used to, so I don't. In later years, I haven't been able to do that quite as much.
And I'm sure that there's a lot of reward that you feel when you come out of there.
Oh yeah.
Because it's not all about just going in and being fearful and all of those things. It's like you said. It's like finding out what the stories are. What happened in people's lives to get them to where they are, That
is a really great question. That would be worth a whole entire show. And that's that, because there are people that make bad choices and go off in another direction. I grew up with a kid that did that, and I will wonder for the rest of my life how did that happen? Where he wasn't a bad guy. He ended up with dying with 26 bullets in him, and what happened to him? Where did he make that turn?
What was that turn in his life that choice wasn't, necessary? Yeah, I just think there's so many, different things like that. And I love looking into people's lives, because I just feel like I'm so grateful for my own. And I've had my challenges, and so everybody kind of looking at you, they kind of think, oh, she's had everything, or he's had everything. That's just not true. None of us get through life without having bumps in the road.
Oh, absolutely.
And our own challenges. So don't ever look at someone and think, oh, they've got it all made, because even if they got all the money in the world, doesn't make them happy. Look at how many suicides that we see in that direction. So, but I do think that uniting and finding something, you don't have to agree on every single thing that somebody believes or doesn't believe.
Sure.
You certainly can find something that you can unite on, that is, and you leave the other things away, build on something. And that's really where I think there's great hope and opportunity to build a better world for everyone.
Mencken used to say that the mark of civilization was to admit that the other person might be right.
Yeah.
And he would always, if he had an argument with somebody, he would always try to end it by saying to them, "You may be right."
Right.
Yeah.
So I have to ask you this question: all the editing and all the books that you've written and read, and all of the work that you've done, what's your favorite book?
Well, the favorite book is always the one, "And Into the Fire," the one I've just finished.
Last one.
And End of Days is a longer book in which I had a complete global apocalypse. And that was the hardest thing I ever did. But I'm very fond of End Into the Fire. The one I've just wrapped up, I'm very fond of. So it's, that it's always the one that you're closest to is the one.
Exactly. Right. I totally understand that. And so I want people to know where they can reach you and get your books and find out more about you, because you're a very interesting individual, and you've done a lot of good. And for the world, I think that, all the books that you've written and edited, there it is. Just pick them up and read them and learn something. So how do they get in touch with you?
Well, my website is, it should be, if it's not up today, it'll be up in a day or two.
Okay.
It's GleasonBooks.com. Gleason is like Jackie Gleason,
Yeah.
Gleason.
Mm-hmm.
Robert H. GleasonBooks.com. And that they have, they have a contact page, and there's a clip there, a 7-minute clip from when I started that History Channel special, so you can see 7 minutes of Bob. And I always love to hear from readers and people in general.
Right. Well, I'm sure you'll be getting some people that are going to reach out and check out your books, and they should. I just thank you really from the bottom of my heart for coming on and sharing your stories and your wisdom and all the things that you do. And I definitely want to thank the audience today for joining us and being part of this show. So until the next time, we'll see you soon. Take care. Bye-bye now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.